770-5790, 1-800-687-0790. We go to the phones. Joining us this morning, Deputy Press Secretary for the RNC, Mike Joyce, joining us this morning. Mike, good morning. How are you today?
Hey, good morning. Doing all right. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I just saw Ilhan Omar is the latest Democrat who is very upset. Mike, do you remember when the Obama administration announced that Osama bin Laden was dead? And everybody was happy, right? I mean, in the U.S., everybody seemed to be happy. We all kind of came together as a nation. There were people outside the White House waving the American flag. People came together for a little bit, and it's like the left can't even give this president credit for taking out a terrorist responsible for the deaths of U.S. soldiers.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I remember, I'm old enough to remember, of course, I was actually studying for college finals at the time when we killed Osama bin Laden. And yeah, it was a great moment for the country. It united the country. We were able to put politics aside for a minute and celebrate a very historic moment for our country. And of course, I'm sure you've seen the reports where they're saying that Soleimani is a bigger get for the U.S. Than Obama or even al-Baghdadi. Because he was more of not only just a military commander, but also seen as someone as the head of state, because he's able to wage proxy wars all over the entire Middle East. So he was propping up Hezbollah. He was propping up Hamas. He's, of course, responsible for killing hundreds of American soldiers in Iraq. And, of course, we've seen what he's been doing all throughout the region in Syria, propping up Bashar al-Assad as well. So it's disgusting to watch Democrats, again, over the will of the country and what's best for the country, try to score petty political points and accuse the president of being distracting or warmongering or whatever term they want to come up with today. We should all look at this as a win, not just for the American people, but for the Middle Eastern people as well. I think it's very well known that Soleimani was hated by even the Iranian people. Their own citizens didn't like him for just the terrible things that he's been doing and slaughtering thousands of civilians all over the globe.
Well, listen, and I think this, I mean, look, this does play a political role in that the president took decisive action when even the last two administrations, they could have taken this guy out and they did not. This president did. And, listen, I think if this is a point to bring up, if Joe Biden is eventually the nominee, Joe Biden didn't even want President Obama to take out Osama bin Laden. He was against that raid. And you have a decisive president here who took action, and action that I think many are admitting was, pretty gutsy to take in this region.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah. Well, two things. First of all, Mark Esper, the Secretary of Defense, he came out and very clearly said, if we find out that the Iranian Quds Force is going to attack American diplomats around the globe, we'll preemptively strike you first. And, of course, we saw what happened at the U.S. Embassy on New Year's Eve.
Yes.
And so we already had one American casualty from that. And the White House announced last night that there were more attacks on the way. So this was a preventative strike and a very singular, narrowly focused strike. And the second point I want to point out, there was an op-ed in the New York Times this morning pointing out basically the main difference between Barack Obama and President Trump was under President Obama, he was trying to realign American interests with Iranian interests, which is just never going to happen. And the difference with President Trump is he saw Iran for what they're actually trying to do, which is they're trying to take over influence in the region, and they want to kick American forces out and be the dominant power. And that's why we're seeing these proxy wars going on in countries like Yemen, of course, what we've seen in Syria, and even especially Iraq right now as well. So it's very clear the difference between Barack Obama and President Trump. President Trump is saying, if we know that you're going to try to attack Americans abroad, we will not hesitate to strike you first and in a very significant manner. Again, we're talking about someone who's a bigger get for the American government than Osama bin Laden or al-Baghdadi. So, again, I think it really just shows and underscores how serious and committed this president is to keeping Americans safe, whether here in America or out there abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the the fundraising totals that are out there. How are things looking for the Republicans, and how are things looking for President Trump?
Man, well, it was a pretty prolific fundraising year for President Trump's campaign and the RNC. Together, we raised almost $500 million. That's billion with a B, dollars in 2019. We raised $463 million. Just the last quarter alone, the RNC raised over $72 million. We have over $200 million on hand between the Trump campaign and the RNC. And in the final 3 months of 2019, during impeachment, the Trump campaign and the RNC raised $154 million. So it was pretty comical watching the 2020 Democrat figures come in. Bernie came out on top of all the 2020 Democrats. But even if you look at the Trump figure alone, they raised over $46 million here in Q4 of 2019, or the last 3 months. And you look at what basically we brought in combined, I mean, they just simply will not be able to compete from a fundraising point of view with Republicans up and down the ballot, not just President Trump's campaign, but this money allows us to go after every member of Congress who is going forward with this sham impeachment charade. And we're going to be able to win back the House in 2020. And we're going to have the money and the resources on the ground to do it, thanks to the prolific fundraising under President Trump and RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel.
When you look at a presidential election year, how do things change as we get closer to an election? Like, are there people right now, do you think there are a lot of Republicans who would normally contribute right now who are not contributing? I know you've had a lot of new donors, but, does that change as we get closer and people recognize, okay, who's going to be on the, who's going to be the Democrat nominee? Obviously President Trump, the Republican nominee, as we get closer. Do people start opening up their wallets a little bit more? How does that normally work?
Yeah, well, to your point about gaining new donors, I think it's important to point out that since impeachment, between the Trump campaign and the RNC, we've gained over 600,000 new small dollar donors, so people giving under $200 or less. Also, when you break down the fundraising figures from the past 3 months here, it's also very clear that a lot of the donor class in 2016 who might have been hesitant to contribute to President Trump, they're all in this time around. And so to your point, though, Chad, I think what's happening right now is the Trump campaign and the RNC, we're able to kind of run a general election campaign right now while the Democrats beat each other to a pulp on the debate stage and out in the early primary states. So we're going to you'll see more ramped up fundraising for sure between now and the election. And, it seemed like every single month last year, we broke a record at the RNC, thanks to RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, breaking a new fundraising record. So every single month, it was the best month on record in the party's history. And I think you're going to continue to see that. I think you're going to see very prolific fundraising because it's very clear that the American people support this president. They support his America First policies. They love what happened in Iraq last night. They see that President Trump is protecting American interests abroad and that we're finally respected once again. So it's very clear when you see the small dollar donations coming in, seeing the donor class really supporting President Trump this time around, unlike the last time. And again, to your point, Chad, I think you're going to see it ramp up pretty significantly here as we get closer to Election Day. Very
good. Mike Joyce, if people want to get involved, what's the best way they can do so?
Well, we're going to have another round of impeachment coming up as soon as next week, potentially. So if you're upset and you want to get involved, if you can go to stopthemadness.gop, we'd love to get you involved in our operation and help President Trump, and not just President Trump, but Republicans up and down the ballot. And that starts with Senator Cornyn beneath the president all the way down to your local county commissioner.
Very nice. Mike, as always a pleasure visiting with you, and I'm sure we'll visit again very soon.
Always a pleasure, Chad. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's Mike Joyce with the RNC here on the Chad Hasty Show. We'll be right back.